If you live abroad or are thinking about moving abroad and you have a US LLC, it's important that you don't assume that the local country is going to treat your LLC and the income from your LLC the same way that it's done in the US. In this video, we're going to talk through how the LLC works in the US, what the alternative is, and how to determine how the foreign country is going to treat that LLC and what difference it makes if it treats it one way versus the other. And specifically, we're going to talk about the case in the UK because there's a lot of legislation and some current legislation going on there, but it applies much broader. So we're going to talk about how it broadly applies to all countries that you move outside of. And then specifically, like what we do about it. Like how do we make sure that we stay tax efficient and we're not paying more taxes than we need to, given discrepancies between the U.S. tax system and the non-U.S. tax system. So first of all, U.S. LLC, how does it work? If you have a single owner, it's a disregarded entity. Two owners, it's a partnership. The whole point is the LLC is not a taxpayer. Income flows through. You pay tax as the individual. You pick up the income as the individual, regardless of the money that's taken out. So even if you leave all the money in the business, you still pay tax on the net income. If you have a corporation in the U.S., it's the opposite, or it's different. Corporation is the taxpayer. So corporation, you pay tax on your net income at the corporate level. You don't pay tax as an individual till you take the money out as a dividend or sell the stock of the company. In any case, taking the money out. Those are your two options, really, from a U.S. perspective. So if you take that concept and you go, let's say you move abroad. In a lot of cases, I do recommend my U.S. citizen clients to keep their U.S. LLCs as opposed to setting up like a local jurisdiction version of an LLC. That's a different topic we can talk about later, but it doesn't necessarily give you a better tax answer to have a local LLC. So a lot of people just assume, okay, I'm picking up the net income from my LLC in the U.S. I'll have to pick that same net income up in the foreign country. We'll take a tax credit in the U.S. for the tax I pay in the foreign country. All is good, and we move on. So if you move to the UK, UK has a high tax rate, higher than the U.S. So in a perfect world, you're not paying any U.S. taxes because you're paying plenty of taxes in the UK on that same income. That's how it should work. Here's the problem. What if the foreign country treats the LLC as a corporation? In that scenario, you're not picking up the flow-through income from that corporation in the local jurisdiction. You're picking up the income that gets distributed out. So in my example, if you make $100,000 net profit in the business, the U.S. is going to make you pick up $100,000. But if you live in the UK and the UK says, nope, we're going to treat it as a corporation, how much did you distribute? Well, it distributed $50,000. Well, you're going to pay tax on 50 grand in the UK, 100 grand in the US. And now you have this disparity, this mismatch between income. So you're going to end up paying additional tax in the US, less in the UK. So then maybe the next year you distribute more to the UK than the US. So you have this disparity again. And you can start getting in this weird situation where you miss out on foreign tax credits because of the timing mismatch. It just creates a problem. In the UK, this has historically been a problem. And there's actually a court case out there in the UK, which is why I'm mainly bringing it up, because it has the most documented writing and legislation about this issue than any other country that I'm aware of. There's a case called Aaronson or Aronson, where it actually went to the Supreme Court in the UK in 2015. But basically, this was a little different because it was a UK citizen, not a US citizen, with a US LLC. But same problem where the UK essentially wasn't allowing a foreign tax credit because they said the LLC is opaque and not a flow-through. In the Supreme Court case, they reversed it and said, nope, LLC is a flow-through, so you get this credit. Then everybody started relying on Aaronson, and then the UK came out with a statement saying, nope, you can't rely on this case. They made a mistake. And since then, I've had several clients that have submitted the UK's version of a private letter ruling, trying to make the case that their LLC is a flow-through entity, and they've all failed, at least my clients that have tried to do this. So generally, like if you're being conservative, you're stuck in the UK if you have a US LLC, treating it as a corporation. I'll tell you how we can deal with that either way. But what's happening now in the UK, which is important, is the government actually put out a letter saying that they're going to reverse that, or they're trying to reverse that, because they recognize that people are paying 75+% tax rates on their profits from US LLCs because of this disparity. They have a memo out there, I think is what they called it, or like a consultation or something like that. I don't know how a consultation becomes a law in the UK, but I do think it's good news that it's the government putting it out and not like a group of accountants or taxpayers like saying, please, change the rules. That usually falls on deaf ears. But this is the government putting it out, and then there'll be comments on it, and then they'll have to draft the legislation, and then it'll have to get passed, and whatever that process looks like. Just from talking with colleagues, I do think it's something that will get passed. That's the UK. This concept applies in a lot of different countries. Some of them have more written rules on it than others. In any case, it's something you have to get on top of on the front end. Like if we know that they're going to treat it as an opaque entity, for example, I have a client in France that the same thing is happening. And in France, they're going to treat the US LLC as opaque, as a corporation. So all we're doing in that case is, US LLC makes $100,000. We'll just pull it all out in the same year. So partially salary, partially dividend coming out. That way, that same $100,000 is getting taxed in France and it's getting taxed in the US. We take a tax credit in the US for the French taxes paid, and all's good. And then we can just roll on year after year. But the problem would have been is if we didn't know about it, and then we didn't take the distributions or salary in that year, now it's too late. Now we have this disparity, and it's going to be really hard to catch up and equalize it over time. So the whole point, like always, is international tax is a coordination. We have to know what's happening in the foreign country. We have to know what's happening in the U.S. And then we have to use the tax treaties, if available, to coordinate those two rules and two systems together. If you're in Latin America, there's generally not tax treaties, except for in a few cases. So then we're dealing with the local laws. In a lot of countries, like for example, if you're in Costa Rica, there probably is no rule about a US LLC and how it's taxed in Costa Rica, other than they have a territorial tax system so that generally you're not paying tax in Costa Rica on income earned outside the country anyway. But anyway, the whole point is you have to know in advance how the other country is going to treat it so that you can make sure you're coordinating the income correctly. Like I said, there is a answer to this problem, even if one country's treating it as a flow through and the other's not. But you have to know that in advance to be able to solve the problem in advance as opposed to later. So if you have a US LLC and you're living outside the US, if you have questions on how to run your business tax efficiently, feel free to reach out to us. I'm happy to give a consultation about your specific situation and how we can help. Thanks for watching. See you next time.